Hello friends, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Michelle Fondin and I'm the author of the new book, The Empowered Divine Feminine, Becoming an Unstoppable Woman in the 21st Century and Beyond. All of my books are available in paperback Kindle and Audible books. If you're new to my channel, welcome. Thank you for subscribing below. Click on the bell, scroll up to all for all notifications, and thank you for giving the video a thumbs up. I do tarot and now astrology readings. You can check those out at the link below at my website, michellefondinauthor.com. Welcome to this newer series. It's not new, it's newer series on this book, The Empowered Divine Feminine. Today we are going to do a deep thought dive into the patriarchy. Now, this is going to be rather free-flowing thought. It's not going to be like a lot of my twin flame videos that were a little bit more prepared. But of course, I'm going to be addressing this book's topics. And today are my deep thoughts about the patriarchy. Hopefully this will get your creative juices flowing. I've got my Grogu tumbler here, which I usually have for my vlogs. I've got some Ticino caramel nut dandelion tea or dandelion caramel nut tea. Super hot today, very hot. It's a chilly day here in Southern California, so we're just going to get started. So I really wanted to have this deep thought discussion about the patriarchy. And to that end, I'm gonna show you guys a cute clip from the 2023 Barbie movie. Hope you enjoyed that clip. That was Ryan Gosling playing the Ken doll and discovering the patriarchy in the real world. If you haven't checked out that movie, it's a very cute movie to watch. But let's talk about the genesis of the patriarchy and why we are where we are today in the world as women and as men. So you don't have to be a woman to understand this. Men can understand this too. But I'm taking it from a feminine perspective, a female perspective, because I'm a woman, right? I can't possibly take it from a man's perspective because I'm not a man. So let's go ahead and dive deep into the history of why the patriarchy. We really have to understand the why behind the patriarchy. So if you really think about it, if you dive back into not so long ago history, not so long ago, guys, and that's something we often forget. I feel like in order to have concrete, forward-moving thought about a concept, in other words, I'm talking about divine feminine empowerment, which is really what I call modern day feminism, not old school feminism, but modern day feminism, moving forward thinking about the future of feminism, thinking about the future of how women all across the globe can find their power. Now, in order to do that, we really have to look at why women have felt disempowered in the past, right? Because life does not exist in a vacuum. So we really need to look at the opposite side, which would not be feminism, but the patriarchy. And I don't think there's a word called masculinism. Maybe there is, I don't know. I haven't looked it up in the dictionary. But let's look at the patriarchy and why it rose to power. Now, of course, in my book, The Empowered Divine Feminine, I talk extensively about this. So if you want to follow along on this series in a deep dive into The Empowered Divine Feminine, then please get a copy of my book in order to follow along in this series. And I might have some like bonus things at the end of this series where you can join a book club, if you will, with me talking over Zoom about this book. So the genesis of the patriarchy, why has it existed since all of recorded history? Well, if you haven't yet noticed, I know some people are in denial about it today, but Men and women are different. Men's bodies and women's bodies inherently are different. We are hardwired for different functions, biologically speaking, in this world, right? Women are meant to carry babies, right? Propagate the species by carrying babies for 9 months. Men are the seeds to plant to have the babies grow inside a woman for 9 months. So if you think about that, why we exist today, we exist today as a species because we've been pretty successful at procreating, right? We've been pretty successful at having women, for the most part, right? For the most part, survive through childbirth and survive through raising children. Now, of course, modern medicine changed a lot of that for the better because before, the reason why, okay, so I'm just gonna go down a rabbit hole here, but some people praise modern medicine to say it was the best thing since sliced bread because before, our lifespan was very short. Well, the reasoning behind that, and in my book, Enlightened Medicine, Your Power to Get Well Now, an integrative approach to healing the 7 deadly lifestyle diseases, I talk about the fact that up until the Civil War, the reason why our life expectancy was so low was not because of disease. Yes, disease existed. We didn't have things like antibiotics, but that wasn't the main reason. The main reason was that most children did not live past their 6th birthday, right? And many women died in childbirth, not because the babies got stuck, but because we didn't know about hand washing. We did not know about germs. And so the problem is that a woman, a midwife or a doctor, if you will, would go to a woman after having done surgery or sutured a wound in somebody else, and they didn't know that by hand washing or by washing the tools that you would get rid of the germs because they didn't know about the germs. And so really that is the reason why so many women died in childbirth, and then the life expectancy was so much lower because most children died of some sort of childhood disease before the age of 6. So that's really the reason why. So, and we have Florence Nightingale, yes, a woman nurse, Florence Nightingale, to thank for that, to thank for the fact that she realized how important hygiene was. And so once she realized that men and women who were delivering babies needed to wash their hands, and it was very simple. She had them washing their hands in lemon water, basically squeezing lemon juice and water, and that would disinfect their hands so that they could treat the next patient. So there you go, a little tidbit of information there. If you think about it, we have been pretty successful as humans in procreating and keeping the species going. But you think about the genesis of patriarchy and why, the why. Well, the first part of the why is that women had to carry babies for 9 months and still have to. And up until, just think about this in context. We are in the year 2024. Until the late 1800s, we did not have electricity. Until the late 1800s, we did not have a telephone. And until 1930, most people did not have a vehicle, did not have a car. So if you put that into context, it's been roughly 100 years since we've had the conveniences of modern life. No electricity, no telephone, no vehicle. That meant we were living by candlelight. We were living by horse and buggy and by foot up until 100 years ago. Now think about this. Think about this. If you were a woman prior to 1930, if you were a woman who was pregnant and you were growing in your pregnant body and you have the job to protect your growing child, is it likely or unlikely that you would have the energy and strength to go chop down trees in order to make firewood to keep your home warm in the winter? And would it stand to reason that you might not have the fortitude and the strength and the energy to go out and hunt a deer, a rabbit, or some other wild creature to prepare for your family, for dinner, right? So you think about our very, 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 very basic human needs. Our needs for food, shelter, water, and warmth, right? You think about those basic needs. And as women, our bodies are naturally softer. Our bodies are naturally more pliable and flexible because they have to be to carry babies. Men's bodies are naturally more agile. They're naturally more muscular. They can take on more weight in poundage to be able to carry things like deer and firewood in order to heat the home. So you understand that we get all up in arms in our modern day. We look at the last 50, 60, or 70 years, and we get frustrated and angry, and we want to blame it all on men in the patriarchy because we are not further along than we should be. And we get angry with other women as we are in direct competition with other women. And we get angry if we don't get A, B, or C rights, which is right? I'm not saying that is wrong. But in order to move forward in your own sense of inner power, you have to understand where we've come from, how far we've come, how long we've come, and the why. And the why. That is the most important thing, is to understand the why. So for all of recorded history, up until, let's just say, in the very least 1930, but really in the United States of America at least, it was until 1974 when women earned the right to have a bank account, when women earned the right to have a credit card, when women earned the right to have a mortgage or a car loan without the signature of a male relative or a husband. So if you really think about that we are so new and recent in coming out from under the patriarchy, that things that are shifting are still shifting. And we don't need to blame the patriarchy for the reasons why we were in that state of dynamic in the first place. We were in that state of dynamic because it was a very subtle agreement that had to happen. And it had to happen because we were still living in the dark ages, right? We say we're not in the dark ages in the 1800s, right? Because we had the intellect, we had the Industrial Revolution. There were so many things that happened that we think about it and we're like, well, no, we were not living in caves. Well, we weren't living in caves, but we were still living under pretty rough conditions. And so 100 years ago, women still needed men, for the most part, for survival. And when you think about that and think that, look, it made sense. It made total sense for men to be the strength, for men to be the breadwinners, even if they weren't working, right? They were going out and hunting for food. And it made sense that they be the protectors if a woman was pregnant and could not fend for herself necessarily because she was protecting the growing life within her. It just made sense. And because it made sense, we had this agreement. So for thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years, we had this agreement between men and women. When you think about it, it's not the patriarchy that is to blame for this agreement. We entered willingly into this agreement. Now, we may not have liked the terms. Perhaps those terms were not something we actually agreed to. But of course, the fact that women needed men's protection, women needed men to be the muscle in the relationship, and women needed to be able to tend to those babies and infants and toddlers. They needed to have all of their energy placed on them, because otherwise we would have not survived as a species. So when you really wrap your head around the fact that the system, the patriarchy, worked, even if it was broken, it worked for so long because it worked. Because it was necessary. Because it was necessary for our survival. Now, with the invention of electricity, the telephone, with the vehicle, and other inventions that happened in the early 20th century, because even though the inventions were invented in the late 19th century, most homes still did not have electricity, if you think about it. Even though the Ford's Model T was created in 1930, most people did not have a vehicle until several years later. So when you think about it, there were creations of modern living, but it took a while before every single household had these modern amenities, which made it then easier for people to not be in fight-flight mode all the time, to not be in survivalist mode all of the time. So let's just think about that agreement. That agreement, even though it was not a utopia, even though it was not the most ideal, even though men abused of that power that they had, right? Not all men, but as a general rule, men abused of that power that they had. The fact that women were vulnerable and needed their protection and help, and they needed them to survive. It worked on some level. And so if you were a woman prior to 1974 in the United States, right? I'm not sure when the other countries got their rights to have financial freedom, but in the United States, it was up until 1974. If you were a woman prior to 1974, you did not have the wherewithal to be able to be completely and utterly independent on your own. And so really, that is the reason why the patriarchy worked. And so when we're sitting here in 2024 and we get angry and upset and we blame it all on men and the patriarchy, we are only seeing half of the picture. Because the other half of the picture is that we, as women, needed that agreement. Right or wrong, we needed that agreement. Because without electricity, without even antibiotics and modern medicine and vaccines, without the means to get food, right? With all the modern conveniences, not even having a refrigerator. My mother remembers not even having a refrigerator when she was a baby. They had something called an ice box. An ice box meaning Mr. Iceman would come around and sell a chunk of ice and you would put it in your refrigerator for a week to keep the food cold. So that was even before the modern refrigerator. So they didn't even have a means before 1940 to have food stay preserved for long periods of time that needed to be cold. We think about that, and then we think about everything that has happened since then. We tend to blame policymakers, we blame politicians, we blame men, we blame the patriarchy, and we say, you guys, everything that is wrong with women's lives is all on you. And the thing is, we really need to take a more measured approach and go, things take time to shift. And even well within ourselves, it still takes time to shift. Because for generations and generations and generations, if you've been told over and over throughout the generations, you need a man for survival, that narrative does not change very quickly. So I am certain that in the very least, your grandmother or your great-grandmother said those words at some point. And perhaps married not for love, but married because it was the right thing to do. Or married because there was pressure from the family. And they said, well, what else are you going to do? You need to get married. How are you going to survive? And so it's not very long ago that all of this has changed. And so as we are entering into our era of feminine power and what I call divine feminine power, women moving up into the higher octave of their power, we need to keep into perspective that the patriarchy, while it is diminishing in power, because it needs to, right? It needs to, because that system does not work anymore. It worked up until the 1950s, maybe 60s. It was waning in power in the early 1900s, but it worked up until those points. But now it just doesn't make sense anymore. And that doesn't mean, for the men watching this, that doesn't mean that we don't need men. We need each other. We are social creatures. We need each other. And that's one thing I really would like you to take away from this video, is that this is not about being a man or a woman on an island, just being solitary. It's not about that, but it is about the conscious choice to choose a person, not based on survival, but based on the fact that there's a real genuine desire to share a life with someone. If we take away the blame of the patriarchy, if we take away the blame toward men and say, you're the reason why I am like this, or you're the reason why women are like this, that's not the entire story, right? That can't be the entire story. The entire story is so much more complex than that. The entire story is us growing and evolving and changing and beginning to change the narrative of what it means to be a woman, changing the narrative of what it means to be a man, and changing the narrative of what it means to be a couple in this new dynamic. And frankly, nobody really knows what they're doing. Not a single person understands fully what they are doing in this new women and men dynamic. We just don't know. We are kind of moving by the seat of our pants. And so as the patriarchy is falling, again, because it is, as it is diminishing in power, now it might not seem like that for the next several years. And in a podcast interview I did with Diane Gilman, and I posted on my community page, I explained that the patriarchy is losing power. The patriarchy knows it's losing power. And so it's grasping at straws to try to maintain power. So you might not see the patriarchy, if you will. You might not see it diminishing in power just yet, because it's going to try to regain the upper hand, regain control, regain power. But that's normal, right? If anybody feels like they're losing power, they're going to try to get it back somehow. But the patriarchy is diminishing in power because the patriarchy as an institution, as a concept, as a philosophical way of being, it no longer makes sense. So it is diminishing in power, and the empowered feminine is rising up into prominence. And I explain a little bit more about that in my book, which we'll certainly discuss in the deep dive into the empowered divine feminine here. So there is that shift happening. But if we can take away the blame, if we can take away the shame, if we can take away the guilt, if we can stop pointing the finger at the other person, pointing our fingers at men, at the patriarchy, if we can stop that, we can begin to see more of the truth. We can begin to see more of our role in the patriarchy. And I know that hurts a little bit, ladies. It hurts a little bit to admit that you had a role in that. Because you had to. There was no choice. That's the way life works. And we are animals after all, right? We are animals. In case you haven't noticed, we're higher thinking animals, but I don't know, maybe we're just arrogant. We think that. We're higher thinking animals, but we're still animals after all. So survival is really important to us. Still is important to us, but we have different ways of dealing with it now that we have modern amenities, right? So I hope that gave you some food for thought as we go more into this deep discussion of the patriarchy and other concepts related to modern feminism and women empowerment. So I hope this was helpful. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for subscribing to my channel below. Click on the bell, scroll up to all for all notifications. Thank you for giving the video a thumbs up. Thank you for sharing this with other women and men. Thanks so much for your support on my YouTube channel. You can buy one of my 11 published books or book a coaching session with me at the links below. And I'll see you in the next video.